Good morning. Another bulletin coming at you right before I catch my flight back to South Carolina. The Russians demonstrate, at least recently, that the only thing they're very talented at is blowing things up. Another satellite, except this time a satellite that already exploded once and seems to have exploded again. And in other news, Virgin Orbit has finally identified what went wrong on their fateful mission out of Cornwall at the beginning of this year. A simple little problem that may indeed have happened before the rocket even left California. But how do they make sure that something like this doesn't happen again? And frankly, are they even going to get another chance? Barely a month has passed since the heartbreaking event took place at Spaceport Cornwall, or more specifically, just south of Ireland over the Atlantic, that torpedoed a lot of Virgin Orbit's ambitions of becoming a worldwide launch provider. Their ambitions of proving that they are capable of launching and deploying satellites from anywhere on the planet as long as they had the basic infrastructure in place, the kind of infrastructure that was set up so well in Spaceport Cornwall. Well, that's a claim that became a lot less legitimate after the anomaly on January 9th. Since that time, Virgin Orbit has been investigating the anomaly in great detail, and they have come to a conclusion that seems very similar to what most people thought the night that it happened, that a simple component in the second stage prevented the engines from getting the fuel they needed to drive the payload into low Earth orbit. And this simple component was a fuel filter that seems to have come loose during the flight, and when it did, it blocked the flow of fuel to the engine. And of course, an engine without fuel is a useless engine, and the second stage and the Newton 3 engine that powered it was unable to reach the necessary altitude to deploy the priceless cargo of satellites on board. And when I say priceless, I don't mean that they were any more valuable than any other cargo, but the customers were incredibly valuable because all of them were either European or from the Middle East, the kinds of customers that Virgin Orbit really hadn't managed to attract in the past. But given that those customers could now deploy their payloads or launch them from Western European soil without having to get involved in any sort of costly and damaging transatlantic journey, well, that made this whole solution very attractive to lots of satellite manufacturers. These customers could now launch their payloads to the orbit that they wanted them to go to rather than have to be subject to a rideshare payload that was doomed to go to an orbit that the main payload was headed towards and not where the CubeSats were going to. And also, they didn't have to pay for transatlantic journeys and other expenses. All of these things made the Virgin Orbit Spaceport Cornwall solution sound very attractive, but none of these advantages mean a damn thing if your payload doesn't get to orbit at all, which of course is what happened. But the question is, how did this filter come loose in the first place? Well, unfortunately, it's possible that the filter came loose as a result of the launch taking place in Britain in the first place. Now, that doesn't mean that it was mishandled by the British or anything like that, but rather the rocket had to be transported from the United States to Britain on two different aircraft. Is it possible that the fuel filter got either knocked loose or damaged during the transport? Well, that is possible and something we'll probably never know. However, in my opinion, what's more likely is the filter became dislodged during its journey from Cornwall to the launch point south of Ireland. As I've been told by Virgin Orbit technicians a number of times in the past, the greatest vibration stresses that the rocket experiences happens during the time frame between takeoff of the 747 and the launch of Launcher 1. That being the case, then, it is far more likely that the filter became dislodged during its journey from Cornwall to the Irish Sea. However, that has happened a number of times in the the past. That is to say, Launcher 1 has been transported by Cosmic Girl to a launch point off the coast of California without any sort of mishaps with fuel filters or anything else in the rocket. So why did it happen this time? Well, of course, the only thing that was different about this launch is the fact that the rocket had to be transported transatlantic. If that is something that becomes problematic with future launches, it's going to put Virgin Orbit's entire business model in serious jeopardy. All we can do is hope that things are going to be resolved and the problem will be more firmly identified before Virgin Orbit commences with their next flight from Mojave Spaceport in the next few weeks, assuming, of course, that everything gets resolved with this anomaly. And by the way, Virgin Orbit cannot afford to experience another anomaly. Their cash flow situation is grim enough as it is at the moment, and they can ill afford another problem. Everybody will be watching that launch from Mojave very closely. And in case you were getting bored with the current state of affairs with space junk in low Earth orbit, well, the Russians just made things a little bit more entertaining. Cosmos 2499 has apparently broken up on January 4th of this year, and that was announced by the U.S. 18th Space Defense Squadron of the U.S. Space Force. And it was announced, by the way, on February 6th, so we may have let that news go by us for a little while we were focused on SpaceX, and we should be focused on SpaceX, but at the same time, the Russians are demonstrating that they have the capability, at least in theory, of preventing anybody from going to space in the near future should they wish to. The Cosmos 2499 satellite was a spacecraft shrouded in secrecy. According to RussianSpaceWeb.com, the story begins on December 25th, 2013, during what appeared to be a routine mission to replenish the Rodnik communication satellite constellation, which had been operating in orbit since 2005. However, unlike the previous 6 launches to replenish this constellation, which had carried a trio of Rodnik satellites apiece, this particular rocket released a 4th object into orbit, and then later on, all 4 satellites were identified to the United Nations as Cosmos 2488, 2489, 2490, and 2491, meaning, of course, that the 4th object was not a piece of space junk as originally believed, but a functioning satellite. But here was the big surprise. Radar observations of Cosmos 2491 indicated that it was carrying out maneuvers in low Earth orbit, the kinds of maneuvers one would expect from a satellite designed to attack other satellites. And then the story repeated itself on May 23, 2014. This time, the 4th satellite was classified as Cosmos 2499, and it too started performing some unusual maneuvers. It descended to a 1,121 by 1,491 kilometer orbit, just below the upper stage that had actually deployed it in the first place, the Briz KM stage. And then it set about stalking the upper stage of the Russian rocket, drawing ever closer as if to experiment as to just how precisely the Russians could intercept another object in low Earth orbit with the Cosmos 2499 satellite. And they were very successful, drawing within a distance of only 526 meters from the Briz KM stage at a relative speed of just 0.064 meters per second. In other words, almost completely paralleling the upper stage of the Russian rocket at a very, very close distance. And then it started doing even more interesting things in 2015. During that time, it moved away from the Briz KM upper stage, dropping below it and then above it, as if to demonstrate just how effectively it could maneuver in relation to other objects in low Earth orbit. And then it moved on another interception course with the Briz KM stage paralleling its course once again. This happened repeatedly, and at that point, the U.S. Space Force began to become a bit suspicious as to what this satellite satellite was actually capable of. Because keep in mind, it wasn't very big, and yet it had managed to carry out a wide variety of maneuvers in low Earth orbit without running out of fuel. Quite an amazing feat indeed, which led them to believe that this satellite was actually employing some sort of ion propulsion or some other form of next-generation propulsion. However, on October 23, 2021, it would appear that the story of Cosmos 2499 came to an end because a breakup was detected by the US Space Force, indicating that the small satellite had disintegrated. However, it didn't go away. Instead, 2 years later, there was a second disintegration event associated with this satellite, taking place, as I said before, on January 4th, 2023. This was unusual indeed, especially for a satellite this small. Once again, what purpose does it serve? Of course, the Russians aren't talking, but there are many theories. One theory is that there were many types of alternate propulsion systems or next-generation propulsion systems on this satellite, and that each of them disintegrated or blew up within a couple of years of each other. The other theory, and a bit more frightening, is the idea that this satellite is capable of carrying out controlled explosions or controlled breakups, allowing it to place enormous amounts of space debris in front of its target multiple times instead of just once, indicating that this satellite might be capable of maneuvering into the path of an enemy satellite and then destroying it with a controlled release of space debris. Given the fact that this satellite has done just that, except not targeting enemy satellites in the process, but still 2 relatively modest releases of space debris thus far, that would be a rather frightening prospect. The idea that a single satellite would have its primary mission being to release space debris into low Earth orbit as part of its overall military mission, heedless of the long-term consequences of releasing space debris into low Earth orbit in the first place. Cosmos 2499 may also be a combination of both concepts, a military satellite designed to intercept other satellites powered by next-generation propulsion. If the Russians have indeed been able to accomplish this in recent years, it would indicate a capability in space a bit more advanced than we might have thought. Once again, these are all theories right now, and the Russians aren't talking. But one thing is clear: several dozen pieces of new space debris have been released by Cosmos 2499, and it may not be done yet. Smash that like, hit that subscribe. We are less than 4,900 subscribers away from that 100K, guys. I am so eager to reach that milestone, so important to my channel. Please check the description for various ways to support my content, and as always, stay angry about space.